To begin doing divination with the Ogham fuse, first you will need to create your own set. There are two popular methods of doing so. The first is to create sticks about the width of your hand. The second is to cut a staff or a branch of wood into disc-shaped sections. Once you have a stick or a disc for each letter, paint, carve, or burn one Ogham character onto each. The fuse are usually carried in what's called a crane bag. This is a bag made of natural materials, usually leather, cotton, linen, or silk. It should be big enough to hold your prized possessions, including your Ogham fuse. The crane is a symbol of justice and longevity, and the crane in the crane bag refers to these qualities and not to the materials used to make the bag. When choosing wood for your Ogham, it's best that you harvest the wood yourself, preferably from a place that has a sacred meaning to you. You'll want to select a wood that's compatible with the powers of divination and the other world, if possible. Good woods for this include hazel, apple, elder, poplar, and elm. If possible, harvest the wood from your Ogham fuse after Beltane but before Samhain, so that the life energy is strong within the branch. You may need to dry wood that is still green before cutting and carving or burning the characters into your fuse. Before you begin any Ogham reading, you may wish to call upon a god or goddess or another sacred ancestor for assistance in interpreting the reading. If you have a patron god or a matron goddess, you may call upon them. Alternately, if you're doing a reading for another individual, you may help them to ask for assistance from their own gods or goddesses. It may also help for both of you to place your hands on the crane bag containing the Ogham fuse while invoking. After this is done, I like to sit quietly with my hands on the bag for a moment or two, so that the spirits can connect with me and speak through me. There are many methods of reading the Ogham. As you gain experience, you can decide which works best for you. I've outlined 3 of my favorites in this video. Experiment with them and see what sort of results you get. You may also create your own ways of reading the omens using the Ogham. There's no right or wrong way to do so, as long as your method works for you. The first method I use is the basic Omen Triad. This works well when reading the omens during a rite, since it's quick and efficient. Draw 3 runes out of the crane bag, one at a time. The first few represents the past. The second few represents the present. And the third few represents the future. Interpret the fuse one at a time, focusing on the transitions from past to present, then from present to future. For example, if you drew Yara for the past, Nun for the present, and Koed for the future, then their divinatory meanings are as follows. Yara is endurance, perseverance, and persistence. Nun is wisdom, knowledge, and learning. Koed is achievement, accomplishment, and victory. A possible interpretation here would be that you have used endurance, perseverance, and persistence in the past to arrive at wisdom, knowledge, and learning in the present. And if you persist on this path, you will reap achievement, accomplishment, and victory. The transition from a past to persistence to a present of wisdom has already awarded you with some accomplishment. And if you transition from wisdom and knowledge in the present by continuing to endure, your reward will be victory in the future. You may also use this technique with other triads. For example, try mind, body, spirit, or emotion, reason, wisdom, or maiden, mother, crone, or golden child, warrior, and sage. For example, if you were doing mind, body, and spirit, the first few you draw interprets the mind of the person that you're doing the reading for. The second few you draw would represent what they're experiencing in their body. And then the third would represent what they're experiencing in their spirit. For the same pathway or the same idea, if you used emotion, reason, and wisdom, the first few would represent emotion, the second few would represent the reason or the thinking aspects of what the person you're doing the reading for is experiencing. And then the third would represent wisdom. That would mean that this few is indicating what the person needs to do to gain wisdom, and so on and so forth. The next method of divination is the Circle of Life divination. This method requires a circle about 12 to 18 inches. If you're doing this divination outdoors, you can draw the circle on the ground, or you can draw a circle on a piece of paper, or carry a cloth with a circle on it in your crane bag. You would then lay the cloth on the table or the floor. Next, have the person for whom you're doing the reading shake the crane bag to sort the fuse, then have them dump the contents of the bag into the circle. This works best if the person is standing over a circle on the ground, but it can also be done on a table if necessary. Any fuse that fall outside of the circle are not read. These are placed back in the bag. Start your reading by interpreting the few closest to the center. It may help to draw a dot in the center of the circle for this purpose. The center few represents the person's current state. If this few is face down, then its meaning is just the opposite of its face value. For example, if the inverted few in question was Nuan, which represents wisdom, knowledge, and learning, then its inverted meaning would be ignorance. Do this for every inverted few within the circle. If there is more than one few at the center, blend the interpretations. If these interpretations cancel each other out, then proceed to the next few closest to the circle center. The fews nearest to the center represent the prevailing forces at work in the person's life. Proceed outward from the center and read each few. The closer to the individual's few at the center are the more powerful influences, and the ones farther away are the less significant influences. If two or more of those fews are overlapping, the top one is exerting influence over the bottom one. And again, if one or more of the overlapping fews are inverted, they have just the opposite meanings of their face value. The Circle of Life reading is good for getting an overall picture of all the powers at work in an individual's life. It's especially useful as a prelude to a healing ceremony or rite. The next is the Cross of Taranis. The Cross of Taranis incorporates the threefold power of land, sea, sky, and the fourfold power of the cardinal directions. This is a reading for yourself or another individual. Begin by drawing a rune that represents yourself or the individual being read. Place that in the center of the table. Next, you will create 4 spokes on the cross, starting in the position of the east. The east would be at the 3 o'clock position on the table. Now draw 3 runes to create the spokes of the wheel, placing one next to each center spoke, then to the next, etc., working from inner to outer. Complete the remaining spokes, proceeding clockwise, with the south at 6 o'clock, the west at 9 o'clock, and the north at 12 o'clock. Always working from inner to outer when laying the runes. When you're finished, the pattern should resemble the figure in the video. To interpret the Cross of Taranis, begin with the center rune. Consult the divinatory meanings of the center rune by looking them up on the website of the blackmountaindruidorder.com under the Omen section. This interpretation represents the person's current state. Next, start with the rune closest to the center rune on the east side, and work your way out from there. The east represents creativity and new beginnings. The rune closest to the center represents the forces of creativity that most influenced the person in the past. The middle few in the east spoke represents the forces of creativity and rebirth that are currently influencing the person. And the farthest few on the spoke represents the creative energy of the future. Next, go to the south spoke. The southern spoke represents the forces of transformation at work in the person's life now. The innermost rune represents things that transformed the person in the past, whether for good or ill. The middle few represents things that are currently transforming the person, and the outer few represents things that will transform the person in the future. The west spoke is next. Starting again with the rune closest to the center, interpret this spoke as well. The western spoke represents the forces of introspection. It's about the person's inner journey. By inner journey, we mean those things that are unique to the individual, that is, the person's personality, thoughts and feelings, and sense of self-identity. The innermost rune of the west represents the energies that directed the person's inner journey in the past. The middle rune, or few, represents those influences in the present, and the outer few represents the inward forces likely to be at work in the future. Finally, interpret the north spoke. North is the direction of stability and prosperity. The innermost few on this spoke represents the things that led to or hindered the individual's stability and prosperity in the past. The middle few represents the energies of stability and prosperity in the present, and the outer few represents those energies in the future. As you gain practice with the Cross of Taranis, you may experiment with different interpretations of the runes on the spoke. A particularly powerful interpretation is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In this reading, the innermost rune on each spoke represents the thesis, or the theme of a person's life regarding the energy of that particular spoke. For example, when reading the east spoke using thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, the innermost rune would represent the creative themes at work in the person's life. Next is the Antithesis Rune. This is the thing or the force that's working against the theme of the person's life. And this is the middle few of the spoke. It represents the powers that are preventing the full expression of the theme of the Thesis Rune. It's the polar opposite of the Thesis few, for example. So if reading the Eastern spoke, the Antithesis Rune or few would be the forces blocking a person's creativity. Finally, we have the Synthesis Rune of each spoke. The Synthesis Rune represents the blending of the forces of the theme and its opposite. So this is the outermost rune. It represents the energies required to achieve a balance of opposites in the person's life between thesis and antithesis. In other words, how does the person achieve a balance between the theme that his life has been about and about the forces that are trying to prevent him or her from living out that theme? Returning to our Eastern spoke example, the Synthesis Rune or few represents the powers needed to overcome the blocks to creativity represented by the Antithesis Rune, so that those represented by the Thesis few are able to come to full fruition in the future through the energies of the Synthesis Rune or few. I know it sounds confusing, but when you start practicing it, it makes a lot more sense. This particular interpretation of the Cross of Taranis is particularly difficult, but when you have gained practice with it, it can be a very powerful divination tool. So the first place to start would be to create your own set of Ogham fuse. You can carve each letter of the Ogham onto a separate stick, or simply draw each letter onto a separate index card. One thing that a lot of my students do who have no ability in wood carving or have no ability to access a tree or trees is to find popsicle sticks at the local craft store and just paint, draw, or carve the fuse onto those sticks. And as you create each of your own fuse, contemplate the meaning for each one. You'll need to create your own fuse for the divination exercises that will come in the future videos that follow. So, if you have the time and the opportunity, do so now before you watch any further videos. Hi, this is Shenka. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying these videos, don't forget to subscribe and click on that little bell icon so you're informed when we release a new video. We try to release a new video at least once a week. And if you're interested in the Black Mountain Druid Order, you can visit our website at blackmountaindruidorder.com. You can also learn more about me, my books, and my music at shenkaskane.com.